I'm Phil Black in Lviv, Western Ukraine, and this is CNN.
President Biden ends a historic trip to Europe with strong words for Putin.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
Will this fight define his presidency?
My message to the people of Ukraine, we stand with you, period.
Plus, Ukraine on the offensive. Its military blows up a Russian ship and blocks an advance into the capital.
We never ever go to the knee. Better we died and give up.
But after new airstrikes in the West, is Putin really narrowing his ambitions? And the culture wars and the court. Did Republicans go too far in attacking a historic nominee?
I am committed to serving as an even-handed Supreme Court justice.
Do you agree with this book that babies are racist?
Good morning and welcome to Inside Politics Sunday. I'm Abby Phillip. President Joe Biden is back at the White House this morning after a trip to Europe and a speech in Warsaw that could very well go down in history as one of the most important of his presidency. His address included some of the most forceful rhetoric against Russia since Ronald Reagan's famous Cold War speeches, and this warning to Vladimir Putin.
A dictator bent on rebuilding an empire will never erase a people's love for liberty. Brutality will never grind down their will to be free. Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia, for free people refuse to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
That last sentence, those 9 words, were not in President Biden's prepared remarks. And Secretary of State Antony Blinken clarified that Biden wasn't talking about regime change. He said he meant that Putin can't exercise power over his neighbors. The president also called the fight in Ukraine just one battle in the larger war of autocracy versus democracy.
History shows this is the task of our time, the task of this generation. Let's remember the hammer blow that brought down the Berlin Wall. The might that lifted the Iron Curtain were not the words of a single leader. It was the people of Europe who for decades fought to free themselves. We're seeing it once again today.
Meanwhile, the war rages on in Ukraine. Russian forces have hit the city of Lviv near the Polish border in the west. And just a day after a top Russian general said that they're focused only on, quote, liberating the Donbas province in eastern Ukraine. But CNN's Phil Black is there in Lviv. Phil, tell us about the damage that you see there today in a city that had largely been not in the line of a lot of the warfare that's been going on in that country.
Yeah, that's right, Abby. Lviv is a slightly rattled city today. This is a city that has largely carried on operating normally through the course of this war. But today, it's a little quieter. A lot more people have stayed home than perhaps normal because the strikes that took place here yesterday have pretty conclusively shown that there is nowhere in this country that is safe from Russia's firepower. There have been other strikes in this region. These were the first to take place within the crowded city limits. The missiles that struck the fuel depot created a huge fire that emergency workers spent most of the night, in fact all of the night really, battling. They didn't extinguish it until just after sunrise this morning. And then the other site that was hit, we understand, is some sort of military infrastructure. The Ukrainians aren't specific there, but according to the Russian military, which has confirmed that it did this, it says that it was a radio repair plant of some kind being used to modernize Ukraine's weapon systems. Now, all of this, of course, while President Biden was across the nearby border in Poland, in the region. So there's been speculation here from the mayor of Lviv and other officials that perhaps this was a targeted message at the US president. It's possible, but it also fits part of a wider pattern of behavior where Russia has been targeting this sort of support infrastructure. It's the third fuel depot in recent days to be destroyed in different parts of the country, along with weapons storage areas and that sort of thing. It's a clear campaign to knock out the logistics and support sites that Russia thinks the Ukrainian military is relying on, Abby.
And Phil, tell us a little bit about what's going on the ground in terms of the Ukrainian counteroffensive.
So we've been talking this week a lot about Ukrainian counteroffensives in and around the capital, Kyiv, making progress there to the west, the northwest, the east. We also have some new video evidence of yet more counterattacks, but this time it's taking place in the far east of the country, near the eastern city of Kharkiv. This is a city that has been largely encircled from the earliest days of the war. It's been under really significant bombardment throughout, and now Ukrainian forces there say they are pushing Russian forces back. And this video seems to show them in a fairly intense firefight in a village about 12 miles, we estimate, from the center of the city, directing much of their fire onto a school building at one point where it appears the Russian forces are holed up. We also are hearing reports of and seeing some evidence of counter-offensive operations a little further north in the Sumy region as well. And as I say, add that to the progress that is being made around Kyiv, and it shows that there has been a dynamic shift in Ukrainian operations over the last week or so, no longer just fiercely resisting, but counter-attacking, clawing back territory that had previously been conquered by Russia.
Phil Black, thank you for all that excellent reporting. And joining me now with their reporting and insights, Robin Wright of The New Yorker and the Wilson Center, and also CNN contributor and former Moscow bureau chief Jill Doherty. Great to have both of you here. Look, there's a lot happening this week when it comes to Europe, but the capstone of it was this Biden, you could call it a gaffe. He had already called Putin a war criminal, a butcher, but now this. What's the significance, you think?
Well, this was, I think, one of the three most important speeches given by an American president in the last 60 years. You have Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis, Reagan in Berlin, and now Biden, talking not just about this moment in history, but about this juncture in history. The gaffe is certainly kind of absorbing all of our attention, but I think history will look back on this speech as one in which he is trying to pull the West back together again after years of a fraying alliance. And he's trying to say, we have to stay the course. We can't let the kind of fatigue that often sets in divert us from what is a challenge, not just in Ukraine, but ultimately between Russia and the West, defining, what the 21st century looked like. Biden had so hoped to move this pivot to Asia, not be dragged into European wars, and he's back where he was. This is a moment to try to move on, to say, let's deal with this and get back to business.
Much ado about nothing?
Unfortunately, I think those, the last 9 words are the thing that people are focusing on. Obviously, you're focusing on history, which is important, but I think, I understand the emotion, and I'm sure President Biden is seeing much more than we are seeing about the horrible.
I mean, he had just visited these refugees. I mean, he had really been up close and personal with them.
And we know that he's a personal person.
Right.
So I'm not surprised that he feels that way. But right now, in terms of what's happening on the ground, it's not only history, but it's the actual war. And so there could be other ways of saying what he wanted to say. Now, I watched how, Russia is reacting to this. Putin has been thinking about this for years. Right. This is no surprise that the Russians know that he wants to, that the United States would love to do regime change, at least in their eyes. But I think their reaction has been interesting because they're concentrating more on the comments by Biden that this is going to be a long war and we have to stay in there. They are not talking so much specifically about regime change because I think that is uncomfortable for the Russians to bring up. By the way.
Yeah, and Peskov kind of shrugged it off and was like, well, it's not, not for Biden to decide. And some people read that as just them sort of, it's baked into the cake. And I think there is an argument to be made, perhaps, that Putin is not going to spare the Ukrainians, whether Biden calls him a war criminal or not, whether Biden says he should go or not. Is there any validity to that?
I think one of the big questions is, what is Putin going to do in response? They may not want to bring this up in public because this is embarrassing. It's humiliating. Yeah. And Putin is very thin-skinned. We know that. This is a campaign that's important. But Biden has also made this comment at a time that the Russian military is not doing very well. And so do you have that intersection where They try to say, well, we're just looking for Donbass. We're really not looking for all of Ukraine. Nobody's going to believe that.
Well, do you buy that?
No.
No. We had a strike on Lviv yesterday, which seemed to say, no, we're not doing that.
And yet, it could be a way for Putin to begin to make the case to the Russian public that the objective has been achieved and we have won. Because if you look at the original reason for going in, it was all protecting the Russian speakers in the eastern Donbass region. And so I think, you could make the argument that it's at least preparing the ground to say, that's what we wanted to do, we protected our own, we've done it, ergo we've won. But that strike on Lviv, I think, kind of blew that out of the water.
Well, and he's also still going to be a pariah. He's still going to face sanctions. So this doesn't solve any of the issues that have now cornered or limited Russia's interaction with the world.
What does the climb down look like? What can a structure of a ceasefire or peace deal look like? Would the Ukrainians have to give up the Donbass, have to cede some territory? Would Russia agree to what some people have described as a kind of, a neutrality for Ukraine, meaning that, the United States agrees to protect Ukraine and so does Russia? What does that look like?
Neutrality already is out there.
Yeah.
I think that they can deal with neutrality.
Yeah.
In terms of recognizing Donbass, those two people's republics, I think you might be able to fudge that in some way that you could not recognize, because after all, they're saying they're independent countries, and Russia is too. Crimea, you might be able to do that too in some fashion by saying, de facto it's in control, but not forever. But I think these are very difficult political decisions for President Zelensky, because there are many people in Ukraine who simply won't go with that. And it could challenge his presidency to do that.
Yeah, I just don't think that Zelensky, having fought, and the Ukrainian people feeling very deeply. Remember, this war didn't start for them on February 24th. This war started 8 years ago. Yeah. And the danger is that even if there is some kind of limitation on Russia's offensive now, that doesn't mean that this is over. I mean, Putin has made clear for 15 years now that he sees Ukraine as part of Russia. That's what he genuinely believes. And so whether there's some kind of limit right now, this war is not going to end. And that's the problem. And I don't think Zelensky is in a position that even if he wanted to, he could compromise very much.
Just take a quick listen to President Biden this week talking about what the future holds for Europe and the United States.
America's ability to meet its role in other parts of the world rests upon a united Europe and a secure Europe. We have learned from sad experience in 2 world wars when we've stayed out of and not been involved with stability in Europe. It always comes back to haunt us, the United States.
Is this a pivot point for the world, for global security going forward?
Absolutely. There's no question. I think, when you look at events, the end of the Cold War, the end of, let's say Putin's presidency, all of this to me is the biggest event. Because Putin is taking it to the end here. He is risking his entire country. His economy is really cratering. Domestically, he has problems. Militarily, he's stuck in a war, whether he wants to end it or not, how he ends it. I think it's very, very, it's really a turning point.
Yeah, it certainly feels that way. A great conversation with both of you. Thanks for being here. And coming up next for us, 1 month into this war, does Ukraine have all the momentum? Retired General Stephen Anderson thinks so, and he'll explain why, coming up next.
Connecting Africa in association with Afreximbank.
From being young, technology is something that I touched and I could see, and I've never thought of anything else. Convergence Partners is a private equity fund that focuses in tech, or what we call now in digital infrastructure, in the African continent. We build subsea cables in the ocean, on both Atlantic and Indian Ocean, and we build satellites and build applications. We connected SEACOM. SEACOM is an undersea cable from South Africa to Mozambique, to Tanzania, to Kenya, Djibouti. We regard ourselves as integral part of the African society, and we want to see, this digital Africa. We live it, we breathe it, and that's what we do.
Connecting Africa in association with Afrexim Bank.
Coronavirus. To get daily news updates in your inbox, sign up for the CNN newsletter. Coronavirus. Fact versus fiction.
There's Indian chai tea, Japanese green tea, and of course, English black tea. But is any of it good for you? It can be if you brew it at home and stay away from those pre-sweetened, canned, and bottled teas. Now, black, green, and white tea, they all come from the same plants, the Camellia sinensis. Herbal teas like chamomile or mint tea do not come from this plant, so they don't have the same health benefits. The polyphenols contained in black, white, and green tea have anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties, and they're linked to the prevention of heart disease, diabetes, and maybe even cancer. Drinking tea is generally very safe, but some people may be sensitive to the caffeine. Teas may also contain vitamin K, so if you're on blood thinners, you should check with your doctor first.
In a special ongoing season of the Tug of War podcast, CNN reporters are on the ground in Ukraine, documenting Russia's invasion, the escalating conflict, and what it means for the rest of the world. Tug of War. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
One month into Russia's war in Ukraine, the Ukrainians say they are on the offensive. Their forces destroyed this Russian ship docked outside of the strategically significant Sea of Azov, just in the southeast. The Ukrainian forces have managed to push Russian forces further out of Kyiv.
We never ever go to the knee. Better we died if give up. The Russians never, I tell you as mayor of Kyiv, as citizens of Kyiv, the Russians will be never ever in our hometown.
And joining me now is retired Brigadier General Stephen Anderson. General, so, Russians have said over the last couple of days, maybe they might be satisfied with just the Donbass region. Maybe they can't and won't try to take territory in other parts of Ukraine. What do you think?
I think that they're saying that because they can't win elsewhere. That's really their only play at this point. They've shown themselves to be totally incapable of really conducting effective maneuver operations against Kyiv. They've executed a poor strategy. Their military is performing terribly. Their leadership is poor. They have morale issues. They're leaving their dead in the streets. American armies would never abandon their soldiers like that. So they're performing terribly, and I think that that's why they're shifting their strategy to the Donbass.
And yet, let's show people a little bit of what's going on the ground. Just yesterday, there were strikes all the way over here in the western part of Ukraine, perhaps just a signal to the west. But the Ukrainians are saying that they have retaken some territory over here, near the city of Kharkiv, over here, near the city of Mariupol, which has been under siege for several weeks. And in Kyiv, Russians are actually being pushed further back. They've not been able to encircle the city. And so what does that tell you even about their ability to limit their own ambitions here?
Abby, what it tells me is that momentum has shifted to the Ukrainians. They're definitely taking the fight to the Russians. They're pushing them back. They're now completely out of artillery range. They've been able to protect Kyiv as such. They're conducting counteroffensive operations all over the country that seem to be successful. Now, the Russians did attack the logistics depot, the fuel depot there the last couple of days, and they're trying to essentially attack the logistics supply chain that the Ukrainians have. But thus far, the Ukrainians have been winning the logistics war, and because of that, they're winning the military war.
Tell us about the tools that they're using to do that. President Zelensky wants more. They want more of everything, frankly. But what's working for them right now?
Well, what has happened in the folding in front of us, in our very eyes here, is that we're seeing the advantage of technology. We're seeing a smaller force on paper that should be getting decimated by the Russians. They're able to hold the day and shift momentum because they have technology on their side, and that's why Americans need to continue to invest in high technology, specifically drones. Look at how the drones have performed. They've taken out a lot of cargo trucks, a lot of command and control vehicles. They've done a magnificent job. Drones are a huge addition to the modern battlefield that we need to continue to leverage. Then the javelins, who have you heard about? 5,000 successful engagements with javelins. They've decimated 275 tanks probably with javelins. And then, of course, the Stingers. The Stingers now they're not heat-seeking anymore. They use infrared imaging technology. They've been able to take out 200 aircraft of the Russians. Tremendous, tremendous. So we got to continue to invest in technology to give Ukrainians in smaller countries like that an advantage.
And Ukrainians say they now want 1,000 of those a day, 500 javelins, 500 Stingers every day. I want to ask you, though, about the logistical challenges that the Russians are having on the ground. They have experienced, according to some estimates, up to 15,000 killed on the battlefield. In 10 years in Afghanistan, 10,000 soldiers were killed. They're also losing a lot of generals. What is the significance of that?
It's hugely significant. It shows that they have a poor leadership structure. The issue with the Russians is they don't have non-commissioned officers in their ranks. They essentially centralize all decision-making. So they don't have people at the tip of the spear that can make decisions. So the generals are having to push themselves forward and exposing themselves, and they're getting shot by snipers. It has exposed this weakness within their military. They don't have lower-level, mid-level management and leadership that they need to successfully conduct combat operations.
But before you go, a lot to talk about the use of chemical weapons and that perhaps Putin could be pushed back against the wall and decide to use them. What do you think is the likelihood of that, and what would be the battlefield advantage to using chemical weapons?
Well, I think that it is somewhat likely at this point because he's losing so bad everywhere else. So, what does he have left in his playbook? Well, this is probably one of the only things, and that, and of course, nuclear. We certainly don't want to go there. But we got to make sure that we do everything we can to set conditions to give him an option other than using these weapons of mass destruction. We've got to ensure that we unify NATO, and Ukraine has succeeded in doing that. Their courage and commitment has inspired the whole world. We need to stay strong. We need to stay unified. And we need to tell Russia that we're not going to stand for this. We don't need to tell them what we're going to do. We don't need to tell them what we're not going to do. But we need to tell them that we're going to take appropriate action if they do something like this.
Very, very serious situation on the ground. Brigadier General Stephen Anderson, thank you so much for being with us. And coming up next, the politics of President Biden's trip to Europe. How do voters feel about his handling of Ukraine? And before we go to break, take a look at this. Scenes from a makeshift underground shelter in Kharkiv.
Immerse yourself in the culture of Azerbaijan.
Thinking of banking in Africa? Think Zenith. In today's fast-moving, fast-changing world, you need a financial partner that understands your unique expectations. A bank with presence in major financial centers across the world, with the enabling platform to facilitate seamlessly, whenever, wherever, however. A bank with best-in-class financial solutions from a superb combination of technology and human touch for easy, fast, and secure banking that creates real value. Turning dreams into reality is now in your hands. People, technology, service. Zenith Bank, in your best interest.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
It really only takes a few moments to gain an appreciation of just how tough it is out here. They've been coming across sniper fire, gunfire, mortar rounds. You can see really just how intense it is here.
We have to wrap it up right now. Quite anxious about spending too much time on scene.
Those of the kids really struggling to get away.
They feel like they won't be able to outrun the war.
They thought the whole border was open.
People are just trying to bust through towards what they think is going to be a better life. These nurses, these doctors really have nerves of steel.
You can't help but be struck by how interconnected our world is.
Arwa Damon, CNN.
I'm Vedika Sood in New Delhi, and this is CNN.
In Europe, President Biden saw firsthand a continent transformed by war. He met with American troops stationed in Poland, praised a revived and united NATO alliance, comforted some of the over 3 million Ukrainian refugees, and he confronted head-on the looming challenges ahead for global democracies.
It will not be easy. There will be cost, but it's a price we have to pay, because the darkness that drives autocracy is ultimately no match for the flame of liberty that lights the souls of free people everywhere.
But this morning, Biden is back in Washington, where polls do show that Americans are skeptical of his Ukraine response so far. Joining me now with their reporting and their insights, Jonathan Martin of The New York Times, Asma Khalid of NPR, and CNN's Manu Raju. So, guys, President Biden had this big moment on the world stage and delivered an incredibly forceful speech, derailed by a few words at the end. But also, I was struck by the White House moving so quickly to publicly walk it back.
It was so striking that that walk back, Abby, came literally before the motorcade even got to the airport. Amazing. After the speech. And the reason it came so fast, I was talking yesterday to some folks in the White House, and I was so struck by the speed of that walk back. And I said, there was no way that you guys could try to embrace that statement. Yeah. And what they said was basically his dedication to keeping the coalition in NATO together is such that there is no way that they could try to sort of own the gaffe, if you will, because it would have roiled every other European capital that so far has been in sync with the U.S. in confronting Vladimir Putin. And the idea that Biden could simply call for regime change and not consult Paris, London, and Berlin was just not acceptable. So they had no choice but to walk back Biden's comment.
But I mean, the irony of this all is that the American people seem to want him to be tougher. You know, the polls show that 52% oppose his handling of Ukraine. They want him to be tougher. That statement was, to some people's ears, tougher.
It was, but it was also, I would say, to many people's ears, a suggestion of regime change, which is just something that, by most foreign policy experts' accounts, would essentially escalate the conflict. And at this point in time, I mean, it also suggests that there's not really a whole lot of room of negotiation with Putin. And if you want a ceasefire, you need to be able to negotiate with Putin. I will say, I think that the trouble that President Biden has is that because he has wanted so much to have a united response with allies, you have to move at the pace that many of your European allies and the rest of the world wants to move at.
Yeah,
and that means sanctions, largely. But
and look, that's been the real challenge for Biden so far, because he wants to maintain unity, but he also wants to talk tough and deal with Putin as tough as he can. But oftentimes it's at a much slower pace than what the American public wants, but it's the pace that his allies wants, whether it's revoking Russia's trade status. That's something that he was pushed by Congress to do. Ultimately, he said yes, but he hit the brakes on that initially because he was trying to get the allies on board. And this has been the challenge for him all along, where it's an off-the-cuff comment saying that he's a war criminal, or off-the-cuff comment calling for regime change. The challenge is maintaining unity, but also maintaining diplomacy.
This is the classic Biden, though, right? Yeah. He is what he is. And part of his appeal is that he's the unvarnished product, and that has helped him politically over the years. Yeah. It's also dogged him politically over the years. I have a book coming out May 3rd. You can buy it now. This Will Not Pass. You can pre-order it today. Me and Alex Burns, that talks more about this, that there is this debate inside the White House about, do we let Biden be Biden, or do we try to restrain him, limit his access to the microphone, because he can sometimes step on the best crafted remarks, even speaking to the world in Poland.
He was faced this week with the question of how this would affect his electoral prospects, Democrats' electoral process. Here's what he said.
No election is worth my not doing exactly what I think is the right thing. Not a joke. I'm too long in the tooth to fool with this any longer. My focus, if any election, is on making sure that we retain the House and the United States Senate, so that I have the room to continue to do the things that I've been able to do in terms of grow the economy and deal in a rational way with American foreign policy and lead the world.
I mean, when I talk to Democratic analysts, though, about the midterms, I will say that Ukraine is not, at this moment in time, really at the top of the list for what domestic concerns are amongst voters. And I know that's a sort of harsh reality. I think if things were to drag on for an extended time, that may change, but it's largely broader frustrations that people have, and that's tied to COVID and the economy, right?
And yet, I just want to show this to the audience. This is an ad from American Bridge, Democratic Super PAC, trying to tie Republicans to a sort of pro-Putin message. This is in Ukrainian, by the way, and it's, I forget what it says here, but it's in Ukrainian. I don't speak Ukrainian, but it's tying Republicans to this issue.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see if it's effective, but you're absolutely right. I mean, this is an issue about how Americans feel. And if this war drags on and prices continue to drive up at the pump, that's what will drive voter frustration at the end of the day. But the question is that if the American public does believe that Biden is handling this well, that improves his approval ratings overall, which we have not seen much example of yet, but this is still early in this crisis. Perhaps that could also lift Democrats down ticket. That is how this could eventually impact the midterms, because in House races in particular, oftentimes it depends on how the president power is doing. The party down ticket could suffer if he's struggling, and right now Biden.
If Biden's at 41, 42% approval on election day, that's going to doom Democrats up and down the ballot. And the truth is, as long as gas prices are where they are or worse, it's going to be very difficult. Right. I had one senior White House person tell me a couple of weeks ago, he said, look, it's going to be tough for us to message domestically out of this crisis as long as gas is where it is. And I think unless that changes sometime soon, they're going to have real issues in the White House.
All right, we'll have to leave it there on this issue. But coming up next for us, racist babies and the definition of a woman. Will Republican attacks on a historic Supreme Court nominee backfire?
We
we've been building Avatar since 2016. So I would say we haven't been chasing a moment. We've been building for this moment for quite some time and really studying, I think, the younger demographic and really where they're trending towards, which is really trying to express an authentic version of themselves. So, I've always felt comfortable behind a keyboard, right? So if I was in school, when I was growing up in middle school or in high school, I would be kind of nervous to maybe talk to a girl, or I'd be kind of nervous to go, show off in front of friends or communicate with friends or whatever. But as soon as I got home and I got into AIM and I got behind my username, I became the most outgoing and gregarious character that there was. You're able to create this manifestation of yourself in this very fantastical art form. So we hope that avatars can be that safe haven that allow you to express yourself from every different segment of your imagination and serve as your emotional surrogate.
The Dubai World Cup began in 1996. Back then, the Middle East was a small player on the global sporting stage. Fast forward to today, and it's expected to be the fastest growing region in the industry in the next 3 to 5 years.
I met up with the chairman of the Dubai Racing Authority, Sheikh Rashid bin Darmouk Al Maktoum, to talk about follies and more.
Eleni, welcome here to the Meydan Racecourse. You're actually walking on one of the best tracks in the world, which is the turf track. Horses that run on this safe ground are horses from all around the world. We believe this is a fair ground for all horses who like the soft ground or the fast ground.
Art is a universal language that inspires people to make a difference and to think about the situation. It doesn't only touch their mind, it touches their soul. My name is Audrey Decker, and I am the co-founder of Street Art for Mankind. Today, there are 152 million children, 1 child out of 10, who is suffering from child labor. Street Art for Mankind is a non-profit organization that believe in art for social change. And that's what we do with big murals made by artists from all around the world. We started Street Art for Mankind around the fight against child labor and trafficking. And we have a series of murals in the financial district of New York, which are called the Freedom Murals. We also have a billboard campaign that we did, and that's called the Free Children Campaign. And this one we did with the street artists, but also with people who are really involved in the cause, such as Ashley Judd, Mira Sorvino, Kailash Satyarthi, Siddharth Kara, and also Nick Kristof. Our dream for Street Art for Mankind is really to create outdoor museums everywhere around the world to have this capacity to inspire people and create art.
In the history of this country, there have been 115 Supreme Court justices. All but 7 of them have been white men, and soon that number may be 8.
I am here standing on the shoulders of generations of Americans who never had anything close to this kind of opportunity. I hope that it will bring confidence, it will help inspire people to understand that our courts are like them.
Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson will almost certainly be confirmed, but that didn't stop some Republicans on the Judiciary Committee from aggressively interrogating her last week.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Do you agree with this book that is being taught with kids that babies are racist?
I want to try to understand here, is it your view that society is too hard on sex offenders?
You know, kind of playing for a different audience here in that room. What do you think is going to be the impact of that kind of questioning on this particular nominee?
Well, look, it's not going to prevent her from being confirmed. She has the votes to get confirmed. Joe Manchin of West Virginia said on Friday that he is going to be a yes vote. The Democrats will keep their party united. But this will be one of the closest confirmation votes in history, given the nature of the 50-50 Senate and given the nature of how polarized the confirmation process is. I mean, there's no doubt that both sides will agree, that she's a well-qualified jurist, someone you cannot dispute any of that. But the way that the confirmation process has completely devolved and broken down over the years, both sides clearly, of course, blaming each other for it, it just shows that no matter how qualified you are, to get more than a couple of votes from the other side is incredibly difficult these days, maybe even impossible these days. In the confirmation hearings showed just why that's the case.
And on the Democratic side, there's no question her treatment was sort of almost a galvanizing moment for progressives.
It was. And I do think, though, this point of the process is really important to bring up, right? Republicans clearly saw this as, I think, a midterm campaign strategy to test out some of their messages. But I was struck, I was looking at polling from Gallup, and they look at all this stuff from how popular various nominees in recent history have been. She's up there with, now Supreme Court Justice John Roberts as one of the most popular, in terms of public opinion, of the American public approval rating. And so you look at Congress and where she's going to get confirmed. I think John Roberts got confirmed like 78-22. It was an overwhelming approval in Congress. She's not going to get anywhere near numbers like that in Congress. It feels like the public and Congress is just totally out of sync.
And you can see, over the years, it's almost impossible. Now, it used to be almost unanimous Supreme Court nominees, and now it is not.
90-9 on the screen, who she is replacing.
Yeah.
And by the way, you know who voted to confirm Stephen Breyer? A fellow named Mitch McConnell from Kentucky. Because back in that period, early 90s, certainly in the 80s as well, this was a vote that, unless the pick was controversial at some level, typically sailed through. It's now become one more red versus blue, tribal up and down vote, and I think that's why we are where we are. You mentioned Democrats being galvanized by this. All of us get these emails, press releases, and pitches for money in our inboxes. I couldn't help but notice this week that Cory Booker sent out an email to his list talking about his comments, which of course got picked up widely on the left and were seen as very inspiring to a lot of folks in the party. That was fascinating to me. I think Booker knows he had a good moment there, and he said he was.
Let's go ahead and just play that.
There you go.
For me, I'm sorry. It's hard for me not to look at you and not see my mom, not to see my cousins. One of them who had to come here and sit behind you. She had to have your back. I see my ancestors and yours. Nobody's going to steal the joy of that woman in the street, or the calls that I'm getting, or the texts. Nobody's going to steal that joy. You have earned this spot. You are worthy. You are a great American.
So Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz wanted some viral moments, but that was the viral moment of this week.
Yeah, it was one of them for certain. I was in the room at the time, and I was watching the audience. I was watching her family right behind her. There were people, all of them in the front row were wiping tears out of their eyes. Several of them were. She was too. So it was a very emotional moment. Which was also striking too is that there were very few Democrats on that committee who did just that, defend her in such vigorous terms. Now, Booker is different. Of course, he's the one black member on that committee, and of course, he spoke to how the impact on his family and the like, and growing up as a minority. But still, you didn't really see as much from Democrats, and that was one of the criticisms that I heard, because they tried to avoid kind of the back and forth mudslinging that we have seen in confirmations past. And Dick Durbin, he did push back from time to time against Ted Cruz, against Josh Hawley, but they wanted to keep the process moving. They didn't want to see what happened in the Kavanaugh proceedings. And as a result, you didn't see very many moments from Democrats really aggressively defending
Could that have been a mistake?
I mean, I think for Booker it was an opportunity. I mean, probably the best moment Cory Booker has had since he came to the U.S. Senate. And I can hear the voices of his campaign staff saying, if only we had that moment during his campaign, because obviously his campaign for president flamed out a couple of years ago.
For the future of Supreme Court, confirmation processes, Lindsey Graham giving us a little bit of a hint this week that we could be in this broken place for a while. The Republican dogma on this seems to be, we will confirm Supreme Court justices of a president of the opposite party whenever we feel like it, and not a second before then. He says to the Washington Post, it's a tricky situation. Graham said, is if Thomas or another justice were to die in 2023 before the actual primaries and caucuses start in the presidential campaign, he says this is sort of uncharted territory, which, of course, it is actually not. Twice before has the Senate confirmed a Supreme Court nominee in a situation like that. We're just in kind of no man's land when it comes to this, I think.
I mean, I do think the process being broken is really a valid point to bring up. I'm not entirely convinced that this will not electorally backfire on Republicans to some degree. I think the assumption that you can be, I mean, you know, Democratic organizers were telling me that they thought, particularly women of color, that they thought some of the questioning was disrespectful and rude. That all being said, the midterms are a long time away, and I'm not sure this will be top of mind.
Mitch McConnell has not committed to, if he's majority leader at next Congress, to confirming a Supreme Court nominee if there is a vacancy. And if there is a vacancy, they could potentially keep it open through 2023, 2024, and it just shows you how this has just completely devolved. I mean, even Democrats, when they were in power, they let Clarence Thomas go through despite the fight in that confirmation proceeding. And who was the chairman of that committee? Joe Biden. They still had hearings.
It's just incredible. Thank you all. Coming up next, those bombshell texts from the wife of a Supreme Court justice about overturning the 2020 election.
My son, calm down now.
Why do you sweat like Amrova?
My uncle no go bite.
Uncle! What happened? Uncle, meet Andy. He has come to ask for my hand in marriage.
Good morning and good afternoon, sir. What about good night? Are you seeing a movie? What nonsense.
Son, you are in control.
No, sir. It's my parents in the village. I'm doing a video call since they can't be here.
Glow Brexit Plus is here. Existing Glow customers will get 400% bonus on every recharge and 100 MB data bonus on first recharge of the month. New Glow customers will get 1,000 Naira welcome bonus. To activate, buy a new Glow SIM today or dial *777# for existing Glow customers.
When we wanted to move faster and see more of the world, we found a way. We also found ways to connect beyond boundaries. And when an unprecedented pandemic tried to derail us, we found ways to get ahead.
Are we ready?
Ready.
Ready.
Ready. Ready.
As your bank, we have stayed proactive, creating dynamic solutions and leveraging cutting-edge technology to drive global expansion into new markets. We rolled up our sleeves to be human together, doing more, innovating smarter, and always showing up for you. So come on board, let's give you more.
Access, more than banking.
Egypt is diversifying its energy mix and extending its pioneering strategy to every part of the country. Through working in partnerships, Egypt aims to provide 42% of its electricity from renewable energy by 2035. The country is successfully transitioning to more sustainable sources, creating green jobs, and powering a more sustainable future.
29 texts from the wife of Supreme Court Justice to then President Donald Trump's chief of staff in the days after the 2020 election. Ginny Thomas wrote on November 6th, "Do not concede. It takes time for the army who is gathered for his back." And then another text on November 19th, "Make a plan, release the Kraken, and save us from the left taking America down." Democrats are, of course, outraged and are pushing for Justice Clarence Thomas to recuse himself from Trump January 6th cases, with Senator Ron Wyden saying his conduct looks, quote, increasingly corrupt. Minority Leader Mitch McConnell released a statement on Friday, though, saying that he has total confidence in Justice Thomas and his brilliance and impartiality. So we are here now with Ginny Thomas, kind of repeating these really extraordinarily outlandish claims. I think for a lot of people, just on that front, it's shocking that some of these conspiracy theories have gotten this far.
Exactly. But I would say, you know, I was struck by what you pointed to, which is that there has been concern amongst Democrats in Congress, but you thus far have seen the top two leaders, Republican leaders in Congress, really not suggest that that Clarence Thomas should recuse himself from these cases because of the text that his wife made.
Yeah, I mean, they think it's no problem. And the January 6th committee, though, is looking at some of this, but it seems somewhat unlikely that they will pursue this any further. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's an open question. There's a big debate, and remember, one person in this committee is Liz Cheney. She is someone who is very close, and despite her being in the outs right now for pursuing this investigation, the Thomases are held up in high esteem in conservative circles. Going after Clarence Thomas's wife could potentially be problematic for someone who's still looking to keep her seat come the primaries that she's facing, of course, a Trump-backed challenger. Now, it still remains to be seen exactly how they managed to move forward here, but it is just remarkable to see the wife of a Supreme Court justice advance really outlandish conspiracy theories, and even after January 6th, suggest that the vice president of the United States could have overturned the election, which has no basis in legal rationality. And here we have the justice that who decided not to recuse himself in dealing with the January 6th case, raises a lot of questions, but the decision to recuse is up to Thomas himself, and he doesn't look like he's going to do it.
It reads like the Facebook comment section of some relative that maybe someone's out.
There's some darker places on the internet than even that.
And yeah, look, it is an illustration that Ginny Thomas was a conservative before Donald Trump came along. Donald Trump was still giving money to Nancy Pelosi. She was a conservative. What it does show, I think, is just how much the Trump effect has reshaped conservatism, right? The language that she's using, the references are so deep down these rabbit holes of sort of online far-right conspiracy theories. This is not like low taxes, less regulation of yesteryear. This is like, you're spending a lot of time on the internet, and these references are so arcane. Again, this is the kind of stuff that you'll see on a Facebook comment section. Like, what the heck is
But
this?
it is now the litmus test for the Republican Party. Donald Trump rescinded an endorsement of Mo Brooks over this very issue. And take a listen to what Brooks said about that.
The president has asked me to rescind the election of 2020.
You said that's illegal. You can't do that. What did he ask you, and what did you tell him?
He always brings up, we've got to rescind the election. We got to take Joe Biden out and put me in now.
He still says that.
Yes.
Hell hath no fury like a man with his endorsement rescinded. I'll tell you what. He has seen the light.
When you're more outlandish than Mo Brooks, I think you're kind of in some really dicey
Mo Brooks is now
territory.
going public. He's like, all of a sudden, Mo Brooks has discovered his conscience about President Trump's very troubling demands. I don't know. The timing is very suspicious. What do you
On the
think?
other side of that, though, in Georgia, where President Trump, former President Trump was last night, David Perdue is going all in on the conspiracy theory.
Because, look, they realize that this is the only thing that Donald Trump cares about. You have to repeat what he has been lying about since right after the election that he lost. Otherwise, what happens? He rescinds the endorsement. But look, the reason why Mo Brooks lost the endorsement is not because Trump says he went woke. The reason why is because Brooks is tanking. He may lose in this primary, and then Donald Trump will be a huge embarrassment for Trump.
Raises the question about his juice. I mean, is he picking the right horses in these races?
I mean, I think there were questions about was he ever picking the right candidates from the get-go. But I mean, in Georgia, if you look at things, I mean, it's a challenge to go against any incumbent when, by most accounts, Brian Kemp, the governor there in Georgia, has done things that Republicans and conservatives are happy with. They are pleased with how he has governed. And so the issue there in Georgia is that David Perdue was always, fake.